Welcome everybody to our debate on do mirror neurons explain anything?
Yes.
I'm David Chalmers, the co-director of the Center for Mind, Brain and Consciousness, which is co-directed by Ned Block. This is the first for the year in a series of debates we're organizing on foundational issues in the mind-brain sciences. We had a couple of debates last year to kick the series off. From now on, we're planning to run 2 of these debates every semester. We've got one coming up in December with Alvin Noe debating Gabrielle Starr on does neuroscience help us understand art? We've got one in February with Susan Carey debating Jesse Prince on are there innate concepts. So the purview of the center is to really come to grips with deep foundational issues in the study of mind and brain, whether from the perspective of philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, linguistics, or any of the many other areas that study the mind. And we're hoping that this series will really provide a good way to bring clear focus to some of these issues. But the issue for today is mirror neurons. So mirror neurons were first discovered in 1991, Vittorio tells me, in the lab of Giacomo Rizzolatti at the University of Parma by a group of people, including Vittorio Gallese, one of our speakers today. There was an initial paper on them published in 1992, but they first started really attracting widespread interest around the later 90s when they were put forward as it was suggested that mirror neurons might play a key role in action understanding. I mean, as soon as the mirror neuron idea went wide, it immediately attracted a huge amount of attention, with potential applications being suggested in a number of domains. I mean, a mirror neuron, for those of you who don't know, is a neuron of a kind first discovered in macaque monkeys that fires both when the monkey is performing an action and when it sees another monkey performing that action. So there's a very suggestive link here between perception and action that many people have thought could be exploited in explaining many cognitive capacities. So the list of capacities to which it's at least being suggested that mirror neurons may play a key role in explaining them is very large. Imitation, perhaps most obviously, but also learning, empathy, understanding intentions, language perception, theory of mind. It's been suggested they have a role in autism or schizophrenia, gender differences, sexual orientation, drug abuse, yawning, self-awareness, and as Greg puts it in his book on the Myth of Mirror Neurons, world peace. In case you think that last one is too strong a claim, V.S. Ramachandran has a TED talk called The Neurons That Shape Civilization. That's all about mirror neurons, and Ramachandran has said that mirror neurons will do for psychology what DNA did for biology. So no small claim. Now I think it should be stressed that the discoverers of mirror neurons, including Vittorio Gallese, our participant today, have not made claims anywhere near as bold as this. I mean, far more sober in the claims made. Nonetheless, there have been strong claims made, even by Vittorio and colleagues. Perhaps the area which has excited the most interest is a potential role for mirror neurons in the understanding of action. So I think that's most likely to be our focus today. That's also been the focus of our other debater, Greg Hickok, who wrote a well-known paper called 8 Problems for the Mirror Neuron Theory of Action Understanding, and more recently published a book called The Myth of Mirror Neurons, which has attracted widespread attention. So I think Vittorio and Greg have sharply delineated views here. I think it's very good to have them both here on stage with us today. They're both very distinguished neuroscientists in their own right. Vittorio is Professor of Physiology in the Department of Neuroscience at the University of Parma, has a long record of important work linking action perception and cognition. He's interested in intersubjectivity and the self and the social, and really just a very large stream of interesting ideas over the last couple of decades. Greg Hickok is Professor of Cognitive Science at the University of California in Irvine. He's specialized in the neuroanatomy of language and work on speech perception, especially been interested in auditory-motor interaction, which really makes his background perfect for an analysis of this topic, and has done a lot of important work quite independent of mirror neurons over the years. So Vittorio and Greg have had a couple of back and forths in the journal, but they've never actually shared a stage, I gather, to talk about this topic. So terrific to have this opportunity today. The format is that each of them will speak for 25 minutes, starting with Vittorio, who's arguing the positive, followed by Greg, who's arguing the negative. They'll each then give 8-minute talks, 8-minute rebuttals or responses to the other speaker, and then we'll throw it open to the audience. Hopefully we'll have a good amount of time for Q&A, hoping to get a thorough airing of the issue. So I'm very much looking forward to this. Now then, we'll welcome our first speaker, Vittorio Gallese.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dave and Ned, for organizing this meeting. I think it's a timely event. I share with you the idea that there's a lot of hype on mirror neurons, and thank you for acknowledging that we are probably mostly not responsible for the weirdest idea that have been linking. I even bothered to write a paper to challenge the view that we are all very good people and sympathetic just because we have mirror neurons, using Girard's notion of mimetic design. This is a very limited amount of time. I don't like TED Talks, so this is not going to be a TED Talk. I try to be as deep as possible with the time limitation allowed by the format of the debate. If we had had this debate a few years ago, we would have been discussing whether mirror neurons exist in the human brain. Luckily enough, we went beyond this, thanks to this group of people led by Itzhak Fried, who has been a pioneer in recording single neurons in the human brain at UCLA, together with Marco Iacoboni and other colleagues. So we know for sure that neurons endowed with properties pretty similar to those displayed by mirror neurons in monkey brain do exist. So the debate, rightly so, is now focusing on what's the purchase of mirror neuron. What can they explain, if they can explain anything at all. I would like to start with a quote with one of my favorite writer, Primo Levi, from The Drone and the Saint, and deals with one of the topic in focus today, understanding. What we commonly mean by understand coincides with simplify. Without a profound simplification, the world around us would be an infinite, undefined tangle that would defy our ability to orient ourselves and decide upon our actions. In short, we are compelled to reduce the knowable to a schema. And I could have stopped here, but it wouldn't have been fair in portraying the thought of Primo Levi. Indeed, he goes on, that's mine. That's yours. In short, we are compelled to reduce the knowable to a schema. With this purpose in view, we have built for ourselves admirable tools in the course of evolution, tools which are the specific property of the human species, language and conceptual thought. I think this frames the topic of understanding in a very interesting way, because it suggests that language is a very powerful mean to accomplish abstraction, but abstraction here is viewed in terms of schematic simplification. And one of my points is that what we are learning from cognitive neuroscience is that if our purpose is to find a one-to-one map in the brain between the concept that we normally use to describe our mental life and their supposedly housing in modules or cortical areas, this epistemological strategy is doomed to failure. So what do we want to explain and how? And I think this debate comes at the right moment, at the time where people like me, cognitive neuroscientists, a prominent figure lives and works here in New York, Joseph Ledoux. He made it clear, don't make me say that fear sits in the amygdala. So we desperately need more theory to guide our empirical investigation. That's why, since many years, I'm happy to collaborate, entertain a dialogue with people from the humanities and particularly with prominent figure from philosophy. And one of them sits here is Alvin Coulton, to whom I say hello. So I think, as I said, it makes little sense to look for a one-to-one mapping between concepts employed to describe social cognition and their supposed location in the brain. There's a personal level of description, which is proper of our approach. We're not speaking about persons, human beings, individuals. Our aim is to provide a level of description of how people work by focusing on a subpersonal component, single neurons, brains, and the like. I take this level of description to be necessary but not sufficient to understand social cognition. To make sense of social cognition, we need to study the brain, its intertwined relation with the body, its relation with the world, and with other brain-body systems, with others. So what can be the purchase of critical neuroscience? I think we should investigate the putative functional antecedents of our cognitive skills, first of all by adopting a comparative approach, which means to study the brain not just of humans but also of animal models, and in particular of non-human primates, where we can get, as we speak, at a level of granularity, of spatio-temporal resolution, which is at the moment precluded when we address directly the human brain. And this is also important, by measuring the socio-cultural influence exerted by human cultural evolution onto those very same cognitive skills. In this way, we can scrutinize some of the concepts we normally use when referring to intersubjectivity, to aesthetics, and other forms of expression of human nature, as well as to the experiential aspects, the experience we make of them, looking for their constitutive elements. And ideally, with this subpersonal level of description, which I take, as I said, to be complementary to a personal approach, we might be able to not only to better understand, but perhaps even revise some of those concepts. When you have a hammer in your hand, people say, everything looks like a nail. So I want to start by disclosing my bias. I have two hammers in my hands. One is the body, and the other is the motor system. Okay? So perception is for action. This is my bias. So I want to put my cards on the ground because I don't know how far I will be able to go with my presentation. So from the outset, I declare that the human body, according to me, plays a constitutive role in foundational aspect of social cognition. In other words, the body is the a priori, non-further reducible condition of possibility of our experience of the world. And following this line of thought, intercorporeality is the ground level of intersubjectivity, is not intersubjective, the ground level. You will be kind enough to say me when I have 5 minutes. Okay. So this qualifies as a bottom-up approach to social cognition. Understanding others, asking questions to the brain. So before getting to mirror neurons, I think it's perhaps worth contextualizing mirror neurons. I have been asked many times, how do they look like? So people outside cognitive neuroscience, also because of this claims about the functional relevance in a bunch of disparate and different things, tend to think about this neuron as a sort of magic neurons endowed with magic power, and therefore probably endowed with some special features that distinguish them from all other neurons sitting around them. This is clearly not the case. When I started being involved in cognitive neuroscience, this was the common wisdom about the function of the cortical motor system. A neural machinery in place to issue commands in order to excite muscles to produce movement. This is a 3D version of the Enfield homunculus, and this was the state-of-the-art how people conceive the organization of the motor cortex in the primate brain. So you have on one, the primary motor cortex. In front of it, this gray area was considered to be quite boring extension, rostral extension of the primary motor cortex in charge of controlling proximal and axial movement. So cognitively speaking, totally uninteresting. After many decades, things have changed. Nobody anymore entertains the idea that area 6 is a uniform field. It's a mosaic of areas, each of those entertaining specific reciprocal connection with distinct field in the posterior parietal cortex, with the basal ganglia, with the cerebellum, and with a bunch of areas in the prefrontal cortex. Here you have a square around the ventral premotor cortex, and area 5 is where we originally discovered mirror neurons. This area entertains reciprocal connection with this area in the inferior parietal lobule and this area which lies buried inside the depth of the intraparietal sulcus, anterior intraparietal area. One point of disagreement that I assume will emerge between Greg and me is how to conceive the organization of the visual streams. In our hands, we are perfectly fine with the idea that we have a ventral stream that ends up in the inferotemporal cortex. The matter of disagreement deals with the dorsal stream. I think the dorsal stream has been portrayed as a visual stream that enables us to be skillful zombies, if you allow me the expression. Skillful in the sense that we don't move like zombies do, but from a consciousness point of view, we are like that. It's supposed to be there for the online control of action. No contribution to consciousness, no contribution to cognition, no contribution to semantics. I take this view to be wrong. I think we should be more fine-grained and distinguish two streams within the dorsal stream. A more dorsal one connecting the superior parietal lobule and the dorsal premotor cortex, which quite correctly is originally put by Mel Goodale and David Miller in the early 90s, supposed to perform an online control of action, but the ventral part, which becomes relevant when we speak of mirror neurons, canonical neurons, F4 neurons mapping peripersonal space, anosognosia, hemispatial neglect. So consciousness plays a major role in some of these issues, is there to control motor output on the basis of perception, but also contribute to spatial awareness and to an abstract action representation which contribute to the meaning we provide to the objects we handle, we manipulate, we look, and to the action and gestures performed by others in our social world. So, I read Greg's book, and I couldn't but thinking that at the basis, his book still, in a way, obeys to this standard view of characterizing our cognitive system, with perception and action playing peripheral roles with respect to cognition, the juicy stuff in the middle. I took this metaphor from the late philosopher Susan Hurley, who put it forward in 1998 in her book, Consciousness in Action. there is a unidirectional flow of information from perception to cognition, from cognition to action, and the idea is that perception and action are two separate domains. And all the meaning conveyed by this metaphor in my hands is profoundly wrong. The cortical motor system is not merely a muscle controller, but an integral part of our cognitive system. It is actively engaged with the processing of space, objects, gestures, and actions. And several anatomical studies have emphasized the analogy between the organization of the premotor cortex in the macaque monkey brain and in the human brain. And here you see the ventral premotor cortex, the inferior frontal gyro with the opercular part of Broca's area, Brodmann area 44, and the supposed analogous areas in the macaque monkey brain. But this is not only an anatomical or odological, as far as we understand, analogy. There is a deep functional analogy that pops out if you bother to do a meta-analysis of the many brain imaging studies targeting that part of the frontal lobe, the granular part of the frontal lobe, the motor one. So the color code is meant to signify this functional analogy. And finally, we get to mirror neurons. Mirror neurons were discovered by chance, but as I always say, it was not a chance. They were discovered by us, because we were looking for visual properties in the motor system. We were studying the motor system on the basis of previous empirical evidence suggesting that what these neurons are in control of is something more sophisticated than merely moving your body parts, you're opening or closing the fingers of your hand, but moving your body parts to accomplish some specific outcome. The notion of goal is a very tricky one and leads to misunderstanding. So we can conceive of a goal as the outcome to which a given action is directed, and this is the meaning I will use when speaking of goal-relatedness among premotor neurons. But a goal is also can be conceived as a mental state of an agent in virtue of which her action might be directed to an outcome. The empirical evidence suggested that movement falls short of characterizing the functional properties of mirror neurons, but of all other neurons sitting around them. And with this experiment done by Alessandro Miltà, we were able to dissociate movements from motor outcomes by training monkeys to use normal pliers and inverted pliers. With inverted or reverse pliers, in order to grasp the object, you must open your hand. So if the neuron codes movement, it should fire when the monkey closes the normal pliers but opens the reverse pliers. If it's the outcome to be controlled, the opposite should occur, which is exactly what we found. And in that respect, mirror neurons behave identically. So, this is what was going on in the lab when we are studying a specific neuron and trying to correlate it with the ongoing behavior of the macaque. This is the sound of a mirror neuron, but it could have been the sound of any other neuron. They all sound the same. Okay, enough. Another point I want to make by saying never alone, no neuron is an island. All the functional properties of each single neuron we have in our head is the outcome of the integration this neuron operates among the different excitatory and inhibitory input that are integrated and at the level of the axon halo produce, whether we go beyond threshold, the action potential, okay? So mirror neuron obey to the very same rule. So as Dave anticipated, mirror neuron fire when the monkey grasps, but also as viewed in the left part of the figure, when the monkey is observing another monkey, or as in this case, a human being performing a similar action. They also respond when the outcome of the action, namely the hand grasping the object, is not visible because there is an occluding surface. They don't respond to pantomimes, but they do respond when the hand disappears behind an occluding surface, provided that the monkey knows there is an object there. So there is no direct vision of the action. The action can be only imaginary, or, if you like to put it in that way, motorically inferred. It's not an inference, it's a motor inference, perhaps. They also respond to the sound produced by an action. So all those properties pushed us to hypothesize that we discovered a rather abstract action representation, an action representation that conveys the same content. It's a grasp, it's a peanut being broken, no matter who performs the action, no matter which sensory channel conveys that content. More recent experiments tested in a more quantitative way other perceptual features of mirror neurons by comparing a naturalistic action, an action performed by a real human being in front of the monkey, with an action, a bidimensional action presented on the screen. On top you see a neuron that responds more to the naturalistic action than to the field one, and on this panel you see a neuron that responds with equal strength to both. Basically, around 43% of neurons don't make any difference in their response whether the action is played alive or is filmed. Another interesting feature of this paper is confronting the view of the action that leads to the discharge of mirror neurons. And among the neurons recorded with this paradigm, a quarter are view invariant. So they respond no matter whether the action is seen from the frontal, from the side view, or from an egocentric perspective. And we believe that this view invariant neuron may implement a top level of a hierarchy encoding observed action in terms of their motor outcomes and independently of their detailed visual characteristics. Recently, the group of Roger Lemon at UCL in London recorded mirror neurons that are all corticospinal neurons. So this neuron directly target spinal neuron sitting at different level in the spinal cord. And interestingly, a substantial percentage of these neurons are excited when the monkey performs the action, but they are inhibited when the action is observed, suggesting that this type of mirror neuron may play a role in inhibiting a sort of echopraxic reproduction of the action that is being observed. As I said before, so I define the mechanism displayed by mirror neuron as one particular instantiation of embodied simulation. Action is not produced, part of the motor system is active, but only simulated. This is the paper that demonstrates the goal or outcome relatedness of mirror neurons. They fire both when the monkey observes a hand action, a reverse ply observation, and interestingly enough, they generalize their response also to an action that the monkey observed many times, but never learned to perform. What is interesting is the latency of the discharge of the neuron. So when the neurons start responding when observing the same action accomplished with different means. The earliest response occurs when the monkey is observing an action which is part of her natural repertoire. The action performed with the naked hand. At an intermediate level, this dotted line indicates the time when the goal is accomplished. With the fingers or the valves of the plier close around the object, or where you have a sticking action being performed. So the discharge becomes later in time as we move away from the natural repertoire of the monkey. This is an action that the monkey can perform, has learned after 4 intense months of training. And as you may notice, the discharge is a bit delayed with respect to the first one. When the monkey is observing the sticking action that she knew perceptually but never practiced, the discharge mostly occurs after the outcome has been accomplished. So there is a sort of linear relationship between the latency of the discharge and the compatibility between what the monkey knows how to do and what the monkey is observing. If we look at the barking dog, our mirror neurons do not fire. Why? Because we don't bark. So we never said that any action can be understood by activating mirror neurons. This applies only to actions that are part of our repertoire or that share the same outcome if accomplished with other means that can be generalized through repeated observation. Another interesting feature is that if you compare, on average, the intensity of the response of mirror neurons when the action is performed with respect to when it is observed, it turns out that the intensity of the discharge is significantly higher when the action is accomplished with respect to when it is only observed, which implies that the mechanism is not totally opaque to the issue of agency. Who's the agent? Because people in the past thought we need to put in place a who system. Marc Jeanreau and Elizabeth Paschery suggested that you need a who system to disambiguate. But you don't need such a disambiguation because the system already in itself is capable of doing it. And other neurons that were first described in the parietal cortex, but other with similar properties were described in the premotor cortex, do something more. They are able to differentiate a similar grasping action according to a more distal outcome. Grasping to eat, the cell fires. Grasping to place, the cell doesn't fire, and the other way around. And similar results have been obtained with brain imaging in humans. Another interesting point, this is a paper published by people at Duke, the group of Michael Platt. These are not grasping neurons, these are neurons that control oculomotion in the area lip, lateral intraparietal area. So they display a mirror property in the sense they fire when the monkey is gazing to the right, the motor discharge, but also when the macaque is looking at another monkey gazing in the same direction. And the author of this paper, such a neural mirroring mechanism applied to oculomotion may be important in the mechanism of shared attention, which is a very important step in the development of cognition in child. I selected this slide to make a very important point. I don't think it's so relevant to speak of mirror neuron, it's more relevant to speak of mirror mechanism. In other words, the mechanism can be instantiated by neurons in different brain areas, and according to where you are, the very similar mechanism of mirroring can support different functional properties. Even more so if we compare mirror neurons in different species. So it's more appropriate to distinguish the properties of action mirror neurons in macaques, oculomotor mirror neurons in macaques, action mirror neurons in humans, or in singing birds, okay? 0. So, okay, I'll stop here.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? I don't like to stand still when I talk, because I can't talk for some reason. Thank you for the invitation. This is a real honor to be discussing these issues in person with Vittorio. I've been reading his work for years and trying to understand it and trying to think about it very deeply because I think it's really important. I want to say a couple things with respect to what we... Is that needed? You guys okay hearing me? I don't think we're recording with that. So. We agree on a few things. I want to make that clear. We agree that mirror neurons exist in humans. I have never doubted that. It's not been an issue for me at all. Even though the evidence for it, the direct evidence for it, is extremely weak. I don't doubt it for a second. Okay, it has to be the case that we have mirror neurons in my mind. That's one thing. A second issue that we agree deeply on is that there is a very tight connection between sensory and motor systems. Those systems are linked. There's not a cognitive sandwich with respect to that link. There's a different view, and I'll address that maybe in the question section or the rebuttal section. So we agree on that as well. So I just want to be clear about that. I want to start with what the claim is. Now, this is what I took the claim to be, and this is what I wrote a book about. That is, that mirror neurons are at the basis of action understanding. I learned just this year that, in fact, to speak of the mirror mechanism as the basis of action understanding is mere nonsense. So I thought that was my position, but apparently it's not. So I'm actually going to argue in favor of what Vittorio has suggested and try to argue against this older view, which has been repeatedly asserted. And I'm going to go further. I'm going to propose a radical alternative hypothesis. That is, the function of the motor system is motor control. And that understanding is achieved primarily by sensory conceptual memory systems. I know this is a crazy claim, it's not intuitive. So the evidence has to be, the evidence is going to have to be airtight to make my case, but I'm going to do my best, okay? Because this is a crazy idea, I understand that. So let's go back to this, and I just want to go back to my initial response to these ideas. I come out of the speech-language world, and when I saw these claims that were applied to speech and language, in fact, speech and language served as an important constraint on the theory development. That is, the mirror neuron data are ambiguous, they're correlational, but you have other data from humans that kind of constrain your interpretation, and one of that bit of constraint was that in humans, you damage this motor system, you could find evidence for speech perception deficits. And that was a way of constraining the theory development in the initial paper. So, which makes perfect sense. So in my simple mind, this claim that we understand action because of the motor representation predicts that if you damage the system, you should see an effect on comprehension or recognition. In my field, I knew that this was not the case. Okay, so that was my initial cause for concern. You can disrupt speech production, as in Broca's aphasia, and not have a noticeable effect on perception. So something's wrong. I asked Vittorio about this years ago, and I didn't get an answer that I liked, and since my work was in speech sensory motor systems, I had to pay attention. So that's what kicked off my whole interest. I actually have a research program of my own. This isn't my area per se. So this is the core of my objection. And there is a sensory motor system. This is what I've been studying for speech. This is what I've been studying for the last 15 years or so. We've identified the circuit. This is work with my collaborator here at NYU, David Huppel. Here's the motor speech system, something like that. There's an interface region, so an area that we've identified as area SPT that we mount with functional imaging that serves as an interface between sensory representations of speech and motor representations of speech. This would be equivalent to area AIP in the dorsal stream of the cat matrix system. So we've identified that circuit. We know that it plays a role in speech production. Here's some recent data from one of my collaborative projects showing that apraxia of speech, which is difficulty articulating speech and selecting speech sounds, is associated in a large sample of acute stroke patients with dysfunction in a bunch of motor-related areas and sensory posterior, somatosensory areas as well. So that's the dorsal stream that's involved in speech production. The question is, does it play a role in speech recognition? That's the big issue. It doesn't, not so much. And we've known this for quite a while from a lot of different studies. So here's the kind of data that originally led to the rejection of the motor theory of speech perception, which had been revived by the mirror neuron discovery. So you can damage motor speech systems and get severe speech production deficits. You get the functional deficit on the production side, but you don't on the recognition side. And that includes damage to M1, to Broca's area, including bilateral lesions, to anterior perculum lesions bilaterally, which produce severe speech production deficits, and large frontoparietal cortex lesions, which take out the entire mirror system on the left. You might want to argue about bilaterals. Failure to develop speech in developmental or acquired anarthria or in cerebral palsy does not preclude normal speech recognition. So people who have never been able to develop the ability to talk can nonetheless perceive speech just fine. Infants, of course, are a good example of that. They have sophisticated speech recognition and perception abilities before they develop speech at 1 month old, and even chinchillas and quail can recognize speech quite well, and they don't have the biological capacity for speech. So you don't need a motor speech system to perceive speech. If you look at large-scale studies of stroke patients, this is an early one by Liz Bates and her colleagues. Speaking fluency is associated with damage. This is 101 people with aphasia. Damage to motor-related areas in the anterior insula. Comprehension is associated with temporal lobe lesions instead of motor-related areas. Here's a study that we did involving WADA patients. This was actually in collaboration with someone who was here at NYU at the time. Arthur Grant. We studied 20 patients who were undergoing water procedures where they had the left or right hemisphere anesthetized. When you anesthetize the left hemisphere, it produces speech mutism. We've taken out the ability to produce speech, and then we can ask, does that affect their ability to comprehend speech? And the answer is a little, not so much. This is proportion of errors plotted. Here is chance level performance at 75%. Left anesthesia, right anesthesia baseline. You get some effect, but you don't have a dramatic effect. Certainly not to the scale you see with respect to their inability to produce speech. So that's more evidence that even acutely, you get a preservation of perception, comprehension in the face of acute disruption of speech production. Here's another study, 23 aphasics with lesions involving Broca's area. This is with Gabriele Micheli in Rome. Patients who have damage to Broca's area, which is a component of the mirror system. It's not necessarily the entire mirror system. On an auditory word comprehension task, performance in this 23 patients was at ceiling. This is now percent correct, or proportion correct. And no significant difference as a function of their speech production problems. If there was some relation between those things, you'd expect more severe production problems to be associated with more severe comprehension or recognition problems. We don't see that. Here's sign language, which is an interesting juxtaposition of language and gesture. With much smaller samples. This is a very rare population, but it's something I've been working on for years. We can identify in our sample, this is 6 patients with damage involving Broca's area. That's a portion of the mirror system, not necessarily the whole mirror system. And their performance on a sign comprehension task is at ceiling comparable to right hemisphere non-aphasic signers. It's only when you start involving the left temporal lobe that you start seeing deficits in sign language recognition. Okay, so just more suggestive evidence. TMS, you might be wondering about those TMS studies that you've heard about. I can talk about some of the older ones that I think are deeply flawed, but I'm going to talk about transcranial magnetic stimulation. This is where we produce a temporary lesion, essentially, in healthy people and look to see what happens when we disrupt the function of the brain area. There have been a lot of studies. Most of them, I've argued, are flawed, and I can talk about that. Here's one that I don't think is flawed. So this is closer to the effect that actually exists, although I could quibble with it. So they studied lip versus tongue sounds, the production of bilabials, B versus D and T with your tongue, making the sounds, and studied stimulation of lip versus tongue areas to interrupt function there. The effect size they report was 0. The interaction between word type and TMS location was not significant in the accuracy data. This is important because a previous study by the same group showed an effect size on an effect on accuracy. I criticized it as being the wrong kind of study. They redid it, the effect went away. They did find a reaction time effect. So if the motor system is contributing something, at least on the basis of these data, it looks like it's speeding up the ability or slowing down the ability to judge the sound that's being produced by a little bit for one type of sound. It got an effect with the tongue sounds, but not the lip sounds. What about manual gestures? So that's the speech side. That was one pillar of support for the original claim of action understanding in the earliest papers from 1996. Limb apraxia was the other pillar, and the claim was that damage to the mirror system produced apraxia, that is deficits in voluntary grasping or performing manual behaviors, and additional deficits in these patients in terms of recognizing these gestures. There was a highly publicized paper that was published in the Journal of Neuroscience in 2008 that makes this claim. It seems to support the theory. The present findings suggest that lesions to left frontal regions that are involved in planning and performing actions are causatively associated with deficits in the recognition of the correct execution of meaningful gestures. If that's true, and I'm perfectly open to this possibility, then that's support for the theory. Okay? It is involved, I'd be willing to say. However, there are reasons to suspect this might not be true. It was a small sample. 33 patients is not a lot in this sort of study. 7 of the 21 cases, that is 33%, had limb apraxia, but no deficit in recognizing gestures. So that's a dissociation. These abilities seem to dissociate in 33% of the cases. They did report a strong correlation, 0.83, highly significant, but they didn't show the graph. As those of you who study correlations, you know that all the details can be in the graph. They did they did show one graph, which was a correlation, a significant correlation between the amount of inferior frontal gyrus damage, that's where some mirror neurons are supposed to live, and gesture recognition deficits, but it looks fishy. You look at the graph, you find the unimpaired patients are clustered in this group here. The impaired patients are so this is a recognition score, better and worse. This is the amount of IFG damaged. And if you look at the impaired patients, you find that there's really no correlation at all in the impaired patients that expands the full distribution of damage. It's only because of this cluster that you're seeing a significant correlation. So maybe it's real. I'm a little concerned about that. But we don't have to rely on that. There is a paper that is now in press in Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience doing a very similar study, 131 patients with left hemisphere damage. This is from the group at Penn in Philadelphia. They used an action production task, which was to pantomime an action associated with a picture tool. So you show a picture of a comb, and the subject has to pantomime using the comb. Their comprehension task was match a verbally cued action, like combing hair, to one of two pictures. Okay, so that's all you have to do is pick the matching one, and then they looked at the relation between these things. This task is very similar to the one that was used in a study on autism, so I don't think there's a task concern there. That should apply. Here's the data. They determined, based on a comparison to a control group, that a significant impairment at p is 0.05 is less than 90% accuracy. 90% or worse is significantly impaired relative to control. So this is their analysis. 37% of patients impaired on action execution are unimpaired on action recognition. So that earlier effect replicated. About a third of the people who have apraxia have no problem with recognition. So that's more of a dissociation. Here's the numbers, and here's the double dissociation. We have a sizable population that is impaired in action production, spared in action comprehension, and then the reverse dissociation is more rare, but you see it. Here's what the data actually look like if you plot the points. Here are the people who are, so this is action execution, action recognition. These are the people who are unimpaired on both. These are the significantly impaired lines. These are people who are impaired on action execution and not on recognition, vice versa. And then those, a large cloud of patients who are impaired on both. So we can ask, what's the relation between these two abilities in terms of R squared, the amount of variance accounted for in these subgroups of patients? Basically, no relation here. That's very small r is not significant, not surprising. That's kind of how the groups are defined. This is the interesting case. And in fact, there is a significant correlation explaining 9% of the variance. Okay, so at best, in this sample, what it looks like is that the motor system is contributing to about 9% of a patient's ability to understand actions. Okay, so if that's what it is, that's what it is. It's just data. We're trying to figure out how this system works. But then you can ask which brain systems are driving this correlation. Right? So if you map the lesions associated with the different deficits, you find that the lesions or the damage associated with action production deficits are associated with, not surprisingly, the inferior parietal lobe, motor areas, temporal lobe areas, which is interesting. Comprehension deficits are associated primarily with temporal lobe lesions in a more anterior frontal region that seems to be outside of the mirror network. If you look at the overlap between those two, which presumably should explain some of the relation between these two abilities, you see overlap in the temporal lobe and in this anterior frontal area, the middle frontal gyrus. Broca's area, premotor cortex, inferior parietal lobe, M1 not implicated in the overlap, suggesting that this correlation is not coming from the mirror system, but it's coming from sensory systems or perhaps higher level executives, some other sorts of systems that the frontal lobe is involved in. What about TMS studies of gesture recognition? There are some of those as well. Those are also, I've gone through a lot of those in my book. I've written recent papers talking about some of these things, but here's one that's actually pretty good. It looks like it's showing an effect, so I want to highlight some more evidence that goes against my claim. Basically what they did is they stimulated lip areas or hand areas and then had people make decisions about lip videos, mouth videos, like licking actions like that versus hand videos. And what they found was that when you stimulate lip, you have more trouble, this is hit rate, more trouble on the lip videos than when you stimulate the hand, and vice versa. That a nice crossover interaction is significant, suggesting that there is an effect, right? Okay. When you plot it on an untruncated scale, however, you see that the effect size is between 1 and 2%. Okay? So again, I will accept this. Although I could quibble with the results of the study, I don't want to make it a quibble about that sort of thing. Let's just accept that there is an effect of the motor system on perception, and this is the effect size. Remember, the effect size in the speech study was 0. It was reaction time. Okay? So what we're looking at, if the motor system is having an effect, in my opinion currently, is that it's going to be very, very small. And we need a theory of the rest of the 99% of the system. What about mirror neurons themselves? So this, what I've just talked about, is my primary objection to the claims about mirror neurons, that they support action understanding. Because when you damage the system, whether anatomically, where they're claimed to be, or functionally, you don't see the deficits you'd expect. So for me, that is, theory is not supported in any strong way. But what about the mirror neurons? If the mirror neuron data were so compelling that it drove us to think harder about the lesion studies, then maybe it would be worth doing that. So let's look at some of the mirror neuron data. Can the mirror neuron data alone tell us convincingly that that action understanding is what's driving it? No, it can't. It's correlational. Just like functional MRI can't tell you what's an area is doing. A correlation between a behavior or stimulus and a cell's response cannot tell you definitively what it's doing. The action understanding hypothesis was propped up by the lesion data from speech and ataxia initially, that we now know doesn't support the theory. Okay, so that's a bit of a problem. The details, and here's the other problem when you look carefully, the details of the mirror neuron data don't fit the action understanding theory as well as you'd like it to. So let me go through that. How is action, so this is the current story. I don't know if the story that Vittorio wants to tell today is different from this, but I just pulled quotes out of a paper to try to tell the story of how this system works. So how is understanding achieved? These are quotes from this paper. The similarity between the motor representation generated in observation and that generated during motor behavior allows the observer to understand others' actions without the necessity for inferential processing. Okay, fair enough. What counts as similar? Neurons in F5 code the goal of the motor act, which, if I'm reading it correctly, are things like grasping, holding, tearing, abstract, not the movements, but the abstract goal, like grasping, with any effect. Right? The defining, another sample, the defining characteristic of F5 mirror neurons is that they fire in response to the presentation of a motor act, which is congruent with the one coded motorically by the same neuron. That's saying the same thing. Which types of mirror neurons are critical? According to this paper, the vast majority of F5 mirror neurons, termed broadly congruent, respond to different motor acts provided that they serve the same goal, citing the original foundational paper. And they provide a mechanism like the visual system where, as postulated by Shepard, resonating elements respond maximally to a set of stimuli, but are able to respond to similar stimuli when they are incompatible or corrupt. A set of mirror neurons, namely the broadly congruent ones, appears to resonate to all visual stimuli that have sufficient critical features to describe the goal of a motor act. So, to summarize, understanding is driven by similarity between representations activated in observation and motor behavior. The representational level where similarity holds is the level of goals. Okay? Broadly congruent mirror neurons are the relevant subset in that they code these goals, allowing for the transformation from particular actions to goal understanding. Close enough? Okay. So, let's go back to the original Gallese data, which is, as far as I know, the most complete study of different types of actions, grasping, tearing, all these sorts of things. Most of the recent studies, if you look, are mostly studying grasping in different formats, so it's basically one behavior. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not completely up on the entire...
I think you know it better than
I probably do.
I wrote 20.
Yeah. So there are 31 strictly congruent neurons. That
Yes.
means that the same 31%, same goal, grasping, and the same motor act, precision grip, activates these cells in production and recognition. Okay? So precision grip versus whole hand. This is what generated the initial excitement, this congruence, this matching thing. But the theory has developed, which theories are allowed to do, and it's the core thing is that they're more general now coding a goal, a more abstract goal. So these are not the relevant cells anymore, 31%. These are the relevant cells. The most common, as was pointed out, 60.9%. And there are three types. Type 1, the execution response is highly specific. So the grip type matters. Okay? It only responds with a particular grip type. The observation response is more general, so maybe precision or whole hand. So this kind of mapping captures the similarity between precision and whole hand grasping, for example. Those are both grasping, but interprets them as one. I mean, if we just read this out or think of this as a system that is generating a population code, what are going to be the inputs of the mapping of this type of cell? This would interpret them as one or the other specific type of grasping. So it's going to conflate the two types of individual movements and one type of grasping. It doesn't capture this, or sorry, it's the reverse. It's going to consider two different types of grasping as a more specific type. It doesn't capture the similarity between grasping with hand and mouth, because that's not the same kind of grasping. Type 2, this is the most common type of problem congruent. The execution response is one goal, so grasping, not tearing, not something else. Observation response is more than one goal, so grasping and manipulating. Okay? So this is going to, the output of this population of neurons is going to falsely collapse different goals onto a single goal. This cell is going to see tearing and grasping and output grasping. Okay? That's not what you want. What you want, in fact, is this response, this type 3, which is 5% of the cells in that paper. The execution response is grasping. The observation response is grasping of any sort. That's what you want. Any kind of grasping should activate the grasping motor cell, generally independent of the type of grasping. There were 3 of these cells out of 92 mirror neurons, and only one goal was represented. If you think of this as a population code and try to get the right understanding response out of this set of responses, it's not going to work very well. Okay, so that's a problem. There are more problems. So there were also non-congruent cells. Placing cells. Interesting. These are the second most common type of response on the observation side. The monkey never placed in any of these experiments. The monkey never put down any food. It was never recorded. If you just do a histogram or count the percentage, they place. I'm sure they place, but it was never studied. There are no placing responses in this system. It is the second most common type of observation response. Why is that the case? That's something, maybe there's a good answer for it, but it's not so obvious why that would be the case. This type of cell was identified in the 1992 study. They called them something else. The third category consisted of neurons in which the effective observed actions were logically related to the effective executed action and could be seen as preparatory for them. For example, the effective observed action was placing an object on the table, whereas the effective executed action was bringing food to the mouth and grasping the object. The proportion of the congruent type to this logically related type is about the same. Okay, there's a large number of these cells. There are more anomalies if you look at other data. Observation responses in mirror neurons are modulated by movement direction, left versus right hand movement, distance from the observer, viewing angle, value of the grasped objects. None of these things have anything to do with action understanding. Why? You can ask why. The answer was in the very first paper published by the group. Here's a quote from the first paragraph of their discussion. And I'll read it in total, and I'm sorry if I go a minute over, but it's a brilliant theory, and I think it's right. And my explanation for what's going on is just copying what they've said. One of the fundamental functions of the premotor cortex is that of retrieving appropriate motor acts in response to sensory stimuli. Evidence has been provided that action retrieval can occur in response to two-dimensional patterns, color and size, and shape of three-dimensional objects. Those are the canonical neurons. The present data indicate that in addition to these physical factors, retrieval can also occur in response to the meaning of the gestures made by other individuals. If one considers the rich social interactions within a monkey group, the understanding by a monkey of actions performed by other monkeys must be a very important factor in determining action selection. Thus, the capacity of inferior premotor neurons to select actions according to gesture meanings fits well in the conceptual framework of current theory on the functions of premotor cortex and expands it to include movement selection related to interpersonal relations. I'm going to skip that because I'm running low on time. More recent authors, including me, mirror neurons, are part of a mechanism for communicating information about perceived actions of others to motor areas that code self-actions for execution. That's me just now in the book. As well as the Parma group, including Vittorio. I don't think Vittorio was on this paper, but they say our results suggest a cognitive role for mirror neurons as a system that not only encodes the meaning of observed actions, but also contributes to choosing appropriate behavioral responses to those actions. It's starting to be acknowledged that these cells are doing more than action understanding. I'm agreeing with that, but saying let's rethink the action understanding. stuff as well. So conclusions. Action understanding hypothesis was worth exploring. It certainly led me to sharpen my own work and really been a help to me. The lesion data refuted central prediction. The full range of monkey data is inconsistent with it. If you try to account for the full range of data, an action understanding theory isn't going to do it. However, an action selection theory might just account for the full range of data. That would be a better theory. There is a viable alternative that's consistent with a wider range of data. I think it's time to abandon the action understanding, or at least pit the two theories against each other in specific experiments. And I'd be happy to work with Vittorio to help
Okay, so now Vittorio will respond.
So, of course, the 8 minutes of rebuttal were meant to be on the fly, and I had to do a bit of mind reading, anticipating what Greg might have decided to use as argument again. So he started challenging the idea that we have any smoking gun showing the relevance of mirror neurons for action understanding, although he mainly focused on speech perception. And the second part, which I found quite strange, he decided to move back. So he discussed our papers, making his main argument by dissecting the percentages of our papers of 96, of our paper of 92, which was the first one. That mirror neurons as motor neuron may play a role in selecting action appropriate on the basis of what someone else is doing is part of our natural interpretation of the finding from the very beginning. What we found was novel back then, and still is the idea that this mechanism could play a role also in action understanding. And I don't think the cases presented by Greg are enough to give up with this hypothesis. The smoking gun. Greg was speaking about many anomalies apparently flowing our idea that mirror neurons may play a role in action understanding. But it's everywhere. I mean, this is Lakatos. Every scientific theory, actually, he wrote every great scientific theory, but I removed the great. Every scientific theory has been engulfed in a notion of anomalies. You want an example of an anomaly? If we rely on lesion studies, this is supposedly the mind-reading module. If you have a bilateral devastating lesion of that mind-reading module, you expect the patient to have deficits while mind-reading others. But it doesn't happen. This lady had no problems in mind-reading others. She had typical confabulatory, memory, planning, typical prefrontal. So on the basis of this evidence, should we give up the idea that we have the theory of mind module sitting there? I would say yes, but most people apparently they are not touched. And this idea is not so deeply scrutinized as our humbler hypothesis of a role played by the motor system in understanding others. It's common wisdom that we have a social brain composed by ventromedial prefrontal cortex, whose bilateral damage, by the way, doesn't produce any mind-reading deficit. And on the other hand, we have the Boston area. TPJ, heralded by Rebecca Sachse, as specifically and uniquely devoted to mind reading. We know this is false. It has been falsified many times. It turns out with rubber hand illusion. It turns out with sexual arousal. So you might want to say that you are sexually aroused only to the extent that you can attribute false belief to others. But it's rather difficult to hold as an idea. Again, no big deal because it's not specific, but the main problem is that we have no causal relationship. I think at the very least we are in a much better shape. We have a neurophysiological mechanism, which we totally lack in the case of mind reading. What makes mind reading specific? Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that this area exclusively activate for mind reading, which is not the case. What makes them mind reading specific? What is the explanation? We don't know. So I think our approach is able to generate hypotheses, and these hypotheses have been indeed verified, confirmed, not only by those small effects acknowledged by Greg himself, because, okay, the effect is small, but the small size of the effect is easy to interpret when we zap 2 millimeter wide of cerebral cortex temporarily with repetitive TMS. A small effect is 30 milliseconds in reaction time, which is a huge effect in many cognitive psychology or psychophysical experiments. 30 milliseconds is a lot. Anyone performing this sort of experiment will agree on that. But so how comes that a lesion in those areas specifically produces, even if in a minority of cases, perceptual deficits? Those perceptual deficits are not predicted unless you allow motor production to play a role, motor representation to play a role in perception. And this is a problem for Greg, I assume. This is a paper we published in Cognition 2 years ago on transfer of learning, observational learning. If you learn an incompatible rule by performing it, when you, a stimulus compatibility effect, if you invert the relationship, so you learn to produce the incompatible response, when you later on perform a Simon test, your reaction times becomes higher because you have learned an inverse association. We were able to, it took me a long time to convince my colleagues to play this experiment. So in this case, people were not performing the spatial compatibility task. They weren't even looking at someone performing the task. They were seeing the response box lighting up, and correspondingly the outcome of the button press appeared on the screen. So they learned this incompatible relationship, and then they performed the Simon task. We ran then other experiments in which everything was the same, but we altered the motor potentialities of the observing participants, either by placing a transparent rigid barrier between the participant and the button box, or by tying the hand of the participants. In a fourth experiment, everything, ceteris paribus, there was an opening potentially allowing the participant to respond, and the results were quite striking. Transfer of learning occurred when they were watching the response outcome. It did not occur when they had their hands tied or when something would have impeded their potential response. But again, the transfer of learning came back when they had the opportunity potentially to perform the action. It's only a motor potentiality. So these results can hardly explain by maintaining that motor representation play no role in perception.
Okay, over to Greg.
I'm excited to hear you say that that one lesion case is evidence against the theory of mind module. And it makes me wonder why the many cases that have been shown that damage to the nervous system doesn't produce speech recognition deficits isn't equally convincing. You made the logical argument with respect to that, but it's disregarded when it comes to the speech, the apraxia data. We have individual cases that have lesions covering the frontal temporal lobe, frontal parietal lobe, and their performance on a range of speech recognition perception tasks is perfectly fine. And the single cases are more convincing. I was looking for a slide, I couldn't find it. The large-scale lesion studies show the same thing. The lesion data is very consistent, and we could quibble about the details of the mirror neuron response patterns. To me, I look at it because there's a lot of data, and it's used to make a lot of interesting arguments. And if they were incredibly consistent in what they were finding in terms of an action understanding response, then, you know, maybe I would think a little harder and use that to, I mean, it's basically it's just data, and it's a theory. And we have two theories now. And you have to just look at all the data and see which theory is better supported. The action selection theory makes the prediction that damage to the motor system, the mirror system, should not affect comprehension. That's confirmed. It makes predictions that if you look at the system neurophysiologically a little more carefully, you should be able to identify arbitrary mappings between the sensory input and the motor output. That is non-understanding output. And you see that. It explains the range of data quite well. It explains the fact that learning happens in the mirror system. In the original studies, mirror neurons did not respond to pliers. And that was an important demonstration that this was a basic evolutionary result. It wasn't an artificial thing. It was something biological. But later on, when you expose monkeys to a lot of plier grasping, it starts responding to pliers. It's not that the monkeys learn to use the pliers necessarily. They can train them. You're associating an action with the response. And if you look at a lot of the studies that have been done, one of the things that I would love to see is a really clear description of the training protocol, because you don't see that in any of the papers. I would really like to know how these monkeys are trained. From what I can gather from these papers, a lot of the training involves familiarizing the monkeys with the experimenter, handing the experimenter food, placing it on a card, giving it to the monkey, grasping it, giving it to the monkey. What you're doing, if this is the procedure, is associating experimenter actions with a monkey response, grasping or doing other kinds of actions. That's going to generate associations that you're going to pick up when you measure from the motor system, not because it's supporting understanding, but because you associate it with these behaviors. So I'm not saying that is the explanation. I don't have enough information to say that is the explanation. What I'm saying is that the lesion data argue strongly against the understanding hypothesis. There's a competing hypothesis, and before we accept the action understanding hypothesis and use it to explain autism and everything else, we need the definitive neurophysiological experiments that I can't do, you could do, that compares these two hypotheses. And that's just the data. It's not that difficult. There was a few more. Do I have more time? Just see what other things I wanted to talk about. The effect size in TMS. It's true. You stimulate a little teeny area, and maybe you're only disrupting it a little bit, and that's why you see these small effect sizes. On the other hand, if you damage the whole system, you don't see an effect. So, do you go with the idea that we're missing the effect because we're only stimulating a little bit, or do we use all the data available to us to help constrain our interpretation of the theory? When you look at all the data, the theory that is most consistent is not the action understanding theory. I'm curious, maybe when we get to the discussion thing, we could talk about F1 mirror neurons, because in the original 1996 paper, the lack of mirror neurons showing up in F1, primary motor cortex, was used as a control. This isn't motor preparation. This isn't anticipatory planning, because F1 mirror neurons don't show these properties, but now we know they do. So that argument kind of goes away. In fact, if you look at the evidence that was used to argue against all the other theories in the 96 paper and for the action understanding theory, they've all disappeared. They're no longer, if that experiment was done today and that was written up, you would not be able to say that. There would be no evidence for the action understanding theory, because all the ideas that you supported it are now shown to be false. I want to say something about this too. I'm not, some people see me as dogmatically opposed to the idea that the motor system can contribute anything.
Just a little.
In fact, I have proposed in speech that the motor system, so my model of motor speech production includes a process derived from work in engineering motor planning research, which suggests that when you generate a movement, it produces an efference copy in sensory systems, which allow you to control and smooth out and correct errors. Okay, that's just part of how the motor system works. I've suggested in a paper, in more than one paper, that maybe the mechanism for how the motor system could influence perception is via this efference copy. It was not designed to modulate perception, but it can be exapted in the evolutionary sense, to apply to a different function. So maybe what happens is, as we're watching an action or hearing speech, we simulate it with our motor system. That generates an efference copy, which could then modulate perception. That doesn't mean that the motor system is the basis of understanding. It's a modulatory effect on understanding that's primarily driven by a different network. Okay? That's a reasonable theory. I have a computational demonstration that this could actually work. So more than anyone, I've developed this idea explicitly. So I'm not opposed to it. I actually think it's wrong, even though I proposed it for reasons that we can talk about. So I disagree with myself now. If you read the final chapter of my book, I explain why I disagree with myself now. Conceptually, it doesn't make sense. It really is an unintuitive idea if you really break it down. But maybe it's right. I'm perfectly open to it. I think that's all I got.
Why don't we get Vittorio and Greg up at the two podium, and all on questions. So we're now open to discussion, and why don't we go to Ned first? Can we get the lights actually on both podiums?
Yeah, this is really a question for Greg. It's common in perception that there is more than one mechanism. So, for example, depth perception, disparity with texture gradients. I read something that said it would so the question is the data you report compatible with there being mirror neurons or a mirror neuron system or a subtype of mirror neurons that are one of many mechanisms for action understanding? So maybe some of your data can be explained by ceiling effects, that the tasks are easy enough so that the other mechanisms can simply do very well. Is that a possibility?
Sure. I've acknowledged that mirror neurons could be participating somehow, but I don't think the only time you see these effects are when you make, so in the speech world, you can get effects with TMS stimulation. So just let's forget about all my concerns that I have with all the TMS studies of speech. Okay? Let's pretend they're all perfectly done studies. Okay? The only way you get these effects is when you present speech and noise at threshold levels. Okay? If you present clear speech, if you present ba and stimulate the heck out of motor cortex, no effect on performance at all. Okay? So, assuming everything else is kosher with these experiments, this system would kick in to modulate performance at around 10%, if you look on average across the studies. A 10% modulation at threshold levels of speech presented out of context and using a task that we already know dissociates from the ability to comprehend speech. So if that's what the mirror system is contributing, go for it. Let's do that. But that's not what I'm interested in explaining. I'm interested in explaining how you guys are understanding my language right now, or how you're understanding my reaching gestures. And the effect sizes are so small that we're talking about window dressings on a computational mechanism that is much deeper and richer than this contributes.
Okay, let's go to Tom Carew, and we had a request that the questioners stand up, so I'll see you in the recording.
Right. Is this one that I could hit the mute button? Great. Great. It's equally effective. So, first of all, let me thank you both. This is not easy to do, and we are in your debt for doing that. Not just as a dean, but as a neuroscientist, has been phenomenal. So, both of you, thank you extremely. And let's stop and thank them now. Favorite question of students on the Ph.D. oral. So any of my students in the room take notes, and it's the following. What experiment would force you to change your mind? if you're going to now sit down with Greg, without Greg, it's the both, I'm just going to frame it. And I know it's tough, but what would make you compare, say, whoops, this is a critical prediction, because a lot of time in neuroscience, I'm in learning and memory, and a lot of my field is driven by metaphor, not mechanism. And when you confuse metaphor and mechanism, you can't go down a lot of paths. When you learn later, you're confusing your own narrative rather than the mechanism that subserve that narrative. So a way to back out of that problem in my field is say, what's the critical prediction? Even if it's like a Dawkins experiment, what would be the thing to make you say, whoops, I've got it wrong?
Yeah, it's an experiment I've been thinking of doing for a long time, but I don't think it has been done yet. There are several technical difficulties in doing it, but stimulating F5, building an action discrimination difficult enough to bypass the ceiling effect, and if by stimulating F5 or AIP or PFG, I wouldn't be able to see some effect, then I would say either that our theory has to be revised or something of that kind. So stimulation should produce, my prediction would be that by stimulating this neuron, you could see an advantage in the possibility to recognize. But it has to be very carefully conceived. And this probably is rather tricky.
Why not use cortical cooling or something to disrupt function? You know you can do that. I think your lab and others have disrupted grasping.
We did it in the past with Mastimol, and we had excellent results in the first monkey. We weren't able to replicate it in the second one. So the results of the first monkey are sitting in the drawer.
So you assessed comprehension? Or
yes,
the
we were asking the monkey to discriminate between different ways of grasping an object, with a hand, with tools. And in the first monkey, it worked quite dramatically, but not with the second.
So I mean, that seemed, for me, if you could show that, I'd say, okay, you know, you're onto something. That would be
I should convince my colleagues. I'm kind of not doing monkey business at the moment.
Those are the, just one last sentence, those are the things that we've been doing in the lesion work. Exactly those experiments that would convince me, and every time that experiment is done, the answer comes back, no effect.
Should have microphone? That's the one that's hot, yeah.
Hi there. So I'm just trying to understand and crystallize the core of the debate. And in thinking about it, I learned a lot today, thank you. We know in other parts of the brain and other systems that there are, let's say, view invariant neurons in the ventral visual stream that represent objects irrespective of their size and location. That must have been surprising to vision neuroscientists a long time ago, and they didn't believe it. And what it means, we don't know, and whether it means a conceptual understanding of objects is unclear, and that may exist in the most anterior parts of the temporal lobe. So it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you both agree that there should be action understanding, we have action understanding, and that maybe mirror mechanisms support that, but maybe not in F5. But if not, so is the main core of the debate that F5 in particular and that primary and premotor cortex is not the seat of this, or that what about in this anterior frontal region that you showed in the MRI that showed overlap? So have we looked elsewhere for the, so just to think about, is that the core of the debate, where this might exist or that it exists, and where are people looking?
For me, the core of the debate is whether the motor system, in particular, wherever that lives, is participating in the ability to discriminate. So the region that the neuron should have motor properties. There are areas, the STS is a region that was known before mirror neurons were discovered, that respond to a range of observed actions that are pretty impressive, including combinations of eye gaze and reaching. I mean, it's just exactly the kinds of things that you would want in a system that can discriminate gestures. Work that's been done in human and biological motion perception show that you stimulate that area, you get effects on discrimination thresholds and The STS looks like the hub for doing action recognition. And that, some people have said, well, then that's part of the mirror system, which to me is not the right way to approach these things. If everything becomes part of the mirror system, the claim is backwards. It goes back to the how does the brain approach. So you have to have a specific claim, and for me, is the motor system involved?
Well, I would say, first of all, when we speak of action understanding, I mean, we took for granted that we all attribute the same meaning to this wording, but I mean, it's a multi-layered enterprise. I mean, I understand someone is knocking at my door, but simultaneously I understand whether this is a student who shyly is afraid to bother me, or if some of my colleagues who read an email I just sent her or him and is angry at me, and on the basis of the intensity and the style of the knocking, I understand that very same action in a completely different way. That's what late Daniel Stern called forms of vitality. And in our lab, people are actively studying the style of action which contributes to the emotional contour, which is an integral part of our social understanding. So by action understanding, we mean many different things. Coming more specifically to your question, I know that Greg, if he had to choose, would go for STS. And this is very interesting because it is a sensory area. There is some deep psychological reason that make it so difficult to people to accept that the motor system has functions that go beyond the mere action execution and action selection. And my background doesn't allow me to investigate more deeply these deep reasons. But there is a sort of resistance. When we describe a neuron that fire both when the monkey grasps a piece of food with the right hand, with the left hand, and with the mouth, and Giacomo, correctly in my way, in the early 80s, came up with the idea of go-relatedness, motor abstract coding. People resisted to that idea, made fun of that and said, go teleology in the motor system, give me a break. This is just a way of describing improperly, in a highly cognitive way, something much simpler. You have a neuron with divergent output reaching different sets of motor neurons that control the closure of the mouth, the closure of the right hand, the closure of the left hand. Well taken. So that was a stimulus to come up with an experiment where we were able to dissociate the opening and the closing with the action outcome, which was the Playa experiment I showed you. So we thought finally people will be convinced that we are dealing with the coding of action outcomes and not mere movement. And the reply was, if it is an action outcome, it must be coded somewhere else, most likely more anteriorly in the frontal cortex. And this neuron will tell the motor system. So for a reason that escaped my understanding, the idea that the motor system might play a role in cognition is hard to digest to many people. I think we are right, and we will pursue our investigation and have an interesting discussion like the one we had today.
Okay, let me see how many people have questions. Barbara. Pass the mic over. You may just need to speak loudly.
Okay, I'm just gonna speak loudly. I don't think this is doing anything. Okay, so thank you. I was wondering if one reason why the proponents of the view that the motor system plays a significant role in understanding action can sort of not ignore the lesion data in speech, but maybe discount it a little bit, is that, well, not all actions are the same, and speech would seem to be the sort of prototypical, the clearest example of the type of action that we understand conceptually. But other actions, someone coming to attack you, whatever, it just doesn't seem to be such a conceptual, we don't have words for it all, but speech it's a very unique kind of action that we perform. And okay, maybe in there it's not so relevant as your data seems to show clearly, but in other areas of life. And also maybe, there's some aspects of speech even that it's important, that small bit, but in other aspects of life, maybe it is.
Yeah, I've used speech as a test case because it's where we have the most data. Speech has been used as a test case in looking at phrenology. It's been used as a test case in a lot of things. And it's a model. It's a model for some process. So I think it's valid in that sense. But it doesn't. But the argument doesn't just apply to speech. If you read my book, I talk about apraxia, which I did here too. So that's different than speech. I talk about all sorts of other things like Mobius syndrome, cerebral palsy, ALS, just everything I could get my hands on, and none of it really supports it. Regarding your everyday kind of actions, it's interesting. I thought about that. I don't think I've tried to say much about it in print. But if I were to suddenly start running at you with a weapon, the last thing you'd want to do is mirror that. And I mean, if you think about sport or interaction, you need to react really fast to threatening situations without thinking.
But
And I
there
think,
is something that inhibits the mirroring, but it still gives you for understanding what you're doing.
sure, but but then do you explain all the rest of the data? Again, it really, guys, it just comes down to the theories and the data. It's just basic science. We have theories, we have data. Which theory accounts for more data? And at this stage, I mean, maybe you can come up with better accounts of all the data. But at this stage, I think it's pretty clear that the view that action understanding is explaining all this stuff does not account for the data better. It just doesn't.
I mean, if someone, let's follow your last example. Someone is coming towards me with an angry face, clenching his fist, so preparing to smack me on my face. If the purpose of mirror neurons were that of action selection, I would be about to produce a similar action, which is not necessarily the case. While if it is action understanding, I understand that the guy is about to hit me, and I'm ready to avoid the fist or take measure to run away or preparing to fight. So I don't see why the action preparation or action prediction would be a better explanation than the action understanding. But let me make another example, because today, for sake of focus and timing, we entirely devoted our discussion to action. But another very interesting aspect of our discovery is that enable people like Alvin Goldman and myself to put forward hypotheses that were later on tested and, in my hands, vastly demonstrated and empirically validated. In 2000, we wrote a small reply to an article that was challenging our previous paper, Mirror Neurons and the Simulation Theory of Mind Reading. In this reply to a guy named Salk, if I remember correctly, we bravely enough suggested that mirror neurons for action could have been just the tip of a much bigger iceberg. So we went on a limb and proposing that there could have been visotactile mirroring or emotion-related mirroring. And this is exactly what we found. We were the first in 2004, the main author is Christian Cases, showing that S2 is activated not only when your legs are gently stroked, but also when you see the leg of someone else being stroked. That led Chris Fleet, Sarah Jane Blackmore to run their experiment on the face, replicating our results and moving even forward, because their brains scanned one synesthete, showing that when you experience synesthesia, the level of activation of the system is higher. So you not only simulate what you see, but you physically feel it on your body. The same applies to emotion with the disgust experiment. So, I mean, this discovery maybe is right, I think is wrong about action understanding. I think they explain one part of this big manifold that we, in simplifying, like Primo Levi said in my opening slide, we use just one single expression for something which is made of many components. But another very important aspect of our discovery was it was able to generate prediction in different fields that were empirically verified. And I'm sure you will come up with another book challenging those. No, I'm joking. I mean, your book, I think, is interesting. Your action along the years has been very helpful in helping people counter challenging your challenges. I mean, this is part of our dialogue. We are not priests or believers. We are materialists. We want to be constantly challenged because no one holds the truth with a capital T in our pocket. So I think what you do is very helpful. But I think that there is some fractal quality in mirroring that can be detected in a variety of fields, not just of action, emotion, sensation. It's most likely an old mechanism because it has been detected in singing birds, it has been detected in marmosets, so New World monkey, in Old World monkey, in humans. So nature, most of the time, economizes resources and metabolic cost. So why should we waste metabolic energy in activating the motor system when listening to speech? I don't understand. Because people deny any activity of the motor system during the processing of speech. They were faced to admit that this activation occurs. It has been demonstrated many times. Friedman Müller is one of the leading, Art Glenberg as well. So they said, well, it might be an epiphenomenon of the mental motor imagery which is cascading after the true understanding process occurs somewhere else.
Troy, I think you may be coming up against the time limit for...
Okay, I'll finish in 2 seconds. But then, Friedman was also able to show that this activation occurs early on. So you have something which has a metabolic cost, which occurs 20 milliseconds after activation of the auditory cortex. Why should we waste that energy if it's useless? It's not a scientific argument.
Let me just answer that question and address one of the other things you said. The reason why you get motor activation is because sensory systems are important for motor planning. They serve as the targets for your actions. You see sensory information about this, that's a target for a grasping action. So these things become associated. If you stick a stimulus in the brain, activate it, you're going to get spreading activation along these connected circuits. That's how the brain is wired up. Not terribly surprising. So the motor control perspective explains that completely. That's one thing. Regarding the sensory response, so it's just interesting, and I haven't thought super deeply about this, but I'd like to put a nugget in your heads to think, one or two of you to think deeply about this. The mirroring mechanism has been extended beyond the motor system into sensory systems. This strikes me as a bit odd, because in a sense, what it says, so I understand your sensation by sensing. But that's kind of the same thing. It's like I understand what you were seeing by seeing what you're seeing. It's now everything is in the same format. It's in the same system. It doesn't strike me as a particularly surprising result because we're understanding by sensing, which is kind of what I'm saying about action understanding. We're understanding by sensing the actions in our sensory system, mapping it onto something meaningful. I don't see that as, I see that as a fundamentally different thing. Maybe it's something that should be thought about very carefully.
Yeah.
I just quickly pose the following question. So I don't know if you believe in multivoxel pattern analysis in the brain using distributed information. What would you say if you had an experiment where you showed humans actions that are complementary? Let's say giving someone a check and reaching for it, or hitting a baseball bat and catching the ball. And then if you think mirror neuron system is action understanding, then I assume the pattern should get activated that is the same action, right? But if it is action planning, it should be the complementary action that should be activated. So in principle, I assume you could have people perform actions in the scanner, get the pattern, what it is, and then see if either watching this action activates that pattern or the complementary action.
It depends on the training. What is the person trained to do? So there was a lot of the early, really interesting TMS studies. I don't know that it's been done in imaging, where you stimulate the pinky area or the index finger area and pinky area, and you can get a facilitation of the response, right? And what they've shown in the basic experiment is that when you're watching index finger movements, while you're stimulating the index finger area, you get a facilitation of the motor ability response. So you get a bigger MEP when you're stimulating and watching the same thing compared to when you're watching index finger movement and stimulating the pinky. Okay, so that's evidence that watching a video of index finger movement potentiates the motor system. Okay. Some clever people in London did an experiment where they trained people when they saw index finger movements to generate a pinky movement. And then they demonstrated the effect, they did the training, so you get this reverse mapping, redid the experiment, and the mirror system went backwards. You stimulate index finger, and now you're facilitating pinky MEPs. Okay? Or you get the idea. This effect reverses, and presumably the subjects did not misunderstand that this is index finger movement, which shows a dissociation between these effects. Maybe that method is horrible and that's the wrong study to do, but that's similar to what you're saying, and it's been done.
Can I answer your question? I think it's a very good point. And indeed, such an experiment has been done with brain imaging, and the result of those experiments led the authors of the experiment to have a big press conference and making the claim mirror neurons don't exist in the human brain. That was Alfonso Caramazza in 2009. It was a repetition suppression brain imaging experiment, very poorly devised, and the stimuli were exactly what you were proposing. So people were looking at the typical gesture of the game paper, scissors, stone. So when you see the scissor, you prepare the stone. When you see the stone, you prepare the paper. So when watching an action, you prepare the complementary action that you should perform. And in that case, they couldn't spot any repetition suppression. With the proper stimuli, unfortunately for this group of researchers, Chris Fried and colleagues obtained the opposite results. So the preparation of a complementary action, we know already that doesn't lead to repetition suppression. Although I have other ways of criticizing repetition suppression as an acid test to study properties like those displayed by mirror neurons. But that was an interesting case.
I suggest not believing any functional MRI experiment unless it's been replicated several times. And this is from a person who does fMRI for a career.
Or any physiology experiment.
Please replicate stuff. I don't believe. That's why I say the evidence for the existence of mirror neurons is really.
Or any MRG.
There's one study, the one that Vittorio talked about, and that's the London group that found the effect in 9 out of 10 subjects, something like that. So we have something along those lines. That's the extent of the functional imaging data. Is the intraoperative data.
I couldn't agree more. I'm a single neuron guy. So.
But they exist. I'm telling you, because we have sensory motor systems. So you can make an action, and I can imitate it. You need a mirror neuron for that.
No.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree that the bold response would be too slow to test this, but as a potential, it seems to me that one of the key points of debate is the degree to which the motor system facilitates or augments discrimination, perception, and that and the timing issue is really critical. At what point does it come online to facilitate perception? And so I'm wondering if you would be convinced by intracranial data, EEG data in humans, showing that in degraded conditions, degraded auditory stimuli, words, visual, parametrically degraded, if you could see the motor system coming online preceding the sensory activation, and the degree to which it comes online showing an effective further effective augmentation, so that in more degraded conditions, the motor system coming online to then facilitate or help out. Would you be convinced by that data?
So this kind of speaks to the cognitive sandwich idea, which I've been lumped into liking the hamburger, which I do in some sense. So I see it as two systems. You have one system that is a hamburger. Perceptual information comes in, you map it onto conceptual representations, you can decide not to act, or later you can decide to act. It's going through conceptual memory systems, linking into emotional systems, it's doing all that stuff to figure out what the heck this thing is that you're looking at, or the action do I need to react. There's another circuit, the dorsal stream, which is more direct. That is bun-to-bun. A direct, I mean, look at primary sensory and primary motor cortex. Look at the sensory motor hierarchy that extends all the way up the spinal cord. You have these local things, and they are quick. That's the goal. So if you have something coming at you, you need to react to it immediately. You don't need to think about what it is. It doesn't matter whether it's something good or bad. You just need to react to it. So that's what that system is for. And that's why it's fast. So I don't see the speed of activation of the motor system to be an indication that that is augmenting comprehension.
But why would it come online to augment? What would be the purpose
Well,
if it's...
we need to know, I mean, if it's a physiological recording, we need to know that it is augmenting. So physiology is going to give you correlations. So we want to know what is the effect of damage to that system, of interrupting it, or an ECOG. As soon as that thing starts activating this region, generate an interruption pulse and see what happens. So there's ways to test it. But what puzzles me is that I keep throwing up this lesion data that wipes out the entire system and shows no effect on comprehension, and no one has an answer for that.
Well, no, if the point is that it helps, but only in certain conditions and to some extent.
Yeah.
Why would it do that? And
Right.
do you believe that it seems to me you do agree
I
that
think
it does
could.
help.
So let me give you a scenario of how it could. So it's analysis by synthesis is a term that people throw out as a possibility. So let's take speech. You start to hear the beginning of a sound, I say cat, and you activate your motor system, that generates a prediction. You're simulating what you're hearing in your motor system, that generates a prediction which constrains the way the sensory system is processing that information. That's possible. I don't think it is. Chapter 10. Logically, it doesn't make sense, just because it matters where this signal is coming from conceptually. Maybe the brain will fool you, but conceptually it doesn't make sense, and I can tell you why later, but it will take about 10 minutes.
Vittorio, do you want to comment on this?
No, I spoke enough.
I have a question for you, which is that so the initial data about mirror neurons is extraordinarily suggestive, and there's all kinds of ways in which mirror neurons could be a potential mechanism for all kinds of things, including action understanding. So what I'm really interested in is what you think the best evidence is that they actually explain something. In particular, they actually play a role in explaining action understanding. I mean, it seems to me that the initial data is suggestive. Is it data specific to mirror neurons, or on the other hand, is it some other kind of data which is general data that there are interesting connections between, for example, deficits in motor response and deficits in action perception, which is not specifically about mirror neurons, or is it some third thing?
Well, I think they explain how the outcome of an action performed by someone else can be functionally attributed. We can understand the outcome of the action performed by someone else in a variety of ways. We can do it representationally or functionally. By functionally, I mean that through the mechanism of mirroring, the outcome is functionally attributed to the other agent, the outcome of the action.
But my question was
so
about,
the relation
not about the mechanism. My question was about the evidence. What's the best empirical evidence, in your view, for this explanatory
The best
role?
empirical evidence is how modulating, zapping, stimulating motor performance, you have a purchase in perception. There are several experiments. One is the transfer of learning that I show you. Another one is the experiment by Casile and Giese. I know you have you discussed that in your book or in a paper, which shows that by learning to walk in an awkward fashion, by altering the shifting movement of the upper limbs while blindfolded, you have an advantage in perceiving a similar way of walking with respect to people who didn't go through this motor learning. So evidence is accumulating that by manipulating your motor skill, you have a purchase in your perceptual abilities, and this cannot be explained unless motor representation play a role in
Okay,
perception.
so that's helpful. So that evidence is not specific at all to mirror neurons, rather it's general evidence.
No, let's say mirror
General evidence
neurons,
that the
mirror
motor system
neurons
plays a
are
role.
one instantiation of a more general property of the motor system. Canonical neurons are another example. When I'm looking at this microphone, beside the activation of the visual areas that end up in the ventral stream in defining a specific shape, there are other neurons that I normally employ when I want to grasp this object that are active even when I don't intend to grasp the microphone, but by merely looking at it. And with that, those neurons, a paper I recently published together with Sebo Buiton, by zapping the ventral premotor cortex, your ability to discriminate the shape of three-dimensional object is affected. The effect is narrow, is really narrow, but it's significant. So why on earth we should have a perceptual effect on the possibility to discriminate the shape of different objects by interfering with what is going on in the dorsal stream, if the dorsal stream function is exclusively that of guiding alignment action. This sort of evidence, I think, is quite handy.
Can I address that issue? Can I plug in? I was waiting for this to come up. I have
So we both did a lot of mind reading
Of
last
course,
night.
I have mirror neurons.
Oh, he said that.
It's on record.
Okay, so here's an example of this kind of effect, where you train people with the motor behavior, you show an effect on perception. So this is one of the biggest effects I've seen in terms of the magnitude. What you're looking at here is people, basketball players and coaches and observers, people who go to games, judge on the basis of video clips of people trying to make a shot, whether the shot will go in or not. Okay? And the main thing is the people with motor experience making shots, that's this top graph, and this is correct responses, this is incorrect and uncertain responses. This crossover point is happening where you get more correct and incorrect, even before the ball has left the hand. So it's not trajectory judging, it's movement judging. That's cool, that's a pretty interesting result. Coaches don't show the effect, novices don't show the effect. My explanation of this was, well, if you're a basketball player, it's your job to generate a motor response based on the shooter's behavior. Okay, so whereas the coach, they're not going to have to get a rebound. But if you're a player on the key when someone's making a shot, it will help your behavior to generate some better prediction. So you can expect them to do better. We looked at this a little more carefully, and I got the videos from the authors. The misses are really bad misses. They're air balls. Okay? And it turns out, so we tried to replicate this at UCI with our UCI team, and we brought in a basketball player to generate the data because we wanted more videos, more range of videos. There was only a few. And the guy that we brought in hit 40 shots in a row, made them. We couldn't get, we would have to be there for a day to get enough misses in order to use the misses. And then when we found out that these were air balls, we realized, oh, you have to tell the player to miss, and then use those as the misses. So we did that. But in looking closely at these images, what you notice, so if you play sports and if you shoot baskets, if you are looking to hit the shot, where are you going to look? The back of the rim. If you're going to try to get an air ball, where are you going to look? Not the back of the rim. You're going to look somewhere else. And if you look, so now you don't know, this is just screenshots, but tell me which shot goes in, now that you know that, based on where he's looking. Which one goes in? This one or this one, based on what his eye gaze. How many people think the top one is going in? How many people think the bottom one is going in? Okay, how about this one? Look at where he's looking. Which one is going in? This one's going in? This one going in? Okay, you're now basketball experts. That's the cue that's driving this. You don't have the experience that these players do. When we actually remove that cue from the stimulus, these are UCI's basketball players. We may have to have the Italian team and UCI play to make sure they're good enough. The effect goes away. They're only accurate at the very end. So we explicitly told the shooter to do the same thing, look exactly in the same spot, and it went away. One of my postdocs did this task, and this is just up to the point of where the ball leaves the hand. And this is accuracy. You see the 50% line. He's at chance when we run him through this experiment. You give him lots of training, no shooting training, but lots of exposure over and over again to these things, and suddenly he's able to perform like a basketball player. It's not the motor experience that's driving it. It's sensory experience. When you have motor experience with a task, that automatically generates a lot more sensory experience. And that's what seems to be doing it.
But there are other experiments that tell the opposite.
When you go out there, sure.
Sorry. There are other experiments telling the opposite. One of the first attempts to study brain responses to the observation of movements by factoring the perceptual versus the motor experience was done by Beatrice Calvo Merino, back then I think a PhD student in the group of Patrick Haggard at UCL. So they were able to show that professional dancer activate the mechanism more strongly than naive viewers. And they had capoeira dancer and classic ballet dancer. If you're a capoeira dancer, your motor resonance is stronger for capoeira and the other way around. Then the objection was, well, the difference might lay in the different visual experience. So they published a second paper, and the title was Revealing Seeing or Doing. So they took only classic ballet dancer. This time, participants were divided by gender, female dancer and male dancer. And they were watching either female dancer or male dancer performing classic ballet typical step, which are clearly different according to the gender of the dancer. And the difference was according to the motor experience and not to the perceptual familiarity. So,
Perceptual being vision, not you can't get
yeah,
medicine out of sense.
yeah, it's what you know how to perform which makes the difference in their hand, and I think that's quite persuasive. Your reading of, I think they were all exposed visually in the original paper. I don't know your paper. I have to read it carefully before making an argument eventually against it. I'm not prepared. I don't want to do it. Well, of course, I could spot something, but the point is that the visual experience was the same for basketball player, for novices. I think they had also journalists. Because Salvatore was telling me that journalists were pissed off because they thought they had an advantage with respect to the basketball fan because they were the expert, and there was no significant difference between the public and the journalists. So I think what their interpretation of the data, it passed the reviewers, was published even in Nature. So I'm looking forward to your
Yeah,
paper.
I should say that these data that I showed are preliminary. It may not replicate. So I mean, we're running more subjects, so don't.
Sorry, yes.
Okay, I want to get us a quick follow-up from Ned, and then one last question by Alvin.
I'm just wondering whether the dancing experiment you mentioned and the awkward walking experiments might have a debunking explanation as follows. The best way to get yourself to do an awkward walk is to form a visual image of what it looks like. And that visual image of what it looks like might make you better at recognizing somebody doing that awkward walk.
Yeah.
And the same with the dancing.
But unfortunately, for your alternative hypothesis, when you visualize a movement, you happen to activate the very same motor center. Because when you do motor imagery, so when you are imagining yourself walking in a strange way, you activate the motor system. So imagining to move leads...
I'm talking about imagining what it looks like.
Yeah. But it's,
Okay, well, now we get, but then one wonders whether the extent to which the mirror results are due to imagery.
well, when we are not talking about mirror neurons most likely, but we are talking about one of the functions of the motor system, which is specifically to enable us to skillfully move and act or react to other action, to decode the meaning of basic action as far as we understand. This is debated, and Greg, of course, would disagree. But the motor system turns out to be active also when we imagine ourselves or someone else.
So this could be tested. We could look to see whether there's ordinary visual imagery of motion in the visual system.
Yeah. Well, in the visual system, there is activation when you imagine to see images. And what is interesting, it has been also shown that if you explore an image, let's say a landscape, you move your eyes to scan it. Then you close your eyes and you are invited to imagine to see what you just saw. And it turns out that you keep moving your eyes, scanning the imagined image very much like you did when you were looking. And there's an easy experiment that you could do. If you close your eyes and I ask you to imagine a ball bouncing from floor to ceiling, right, left, like playing squash, you can pretty well visualize the movement of the ball. Then I ask you to do it once more by gently putting your fingers on your eyeball, and you realize that you're moving your eyes in sync with the imagined movement. Why do we do that if the motor system is totally irrelevant for all these things? We are wasting a lot of energy for nothing. I don't take it to be plausible.
Okay, let's take one final question from Alvin Golden.
So this is for Greg. So Greg, I really want to just probe a little more what I would call final take on the phenomena are. So somebody might accuse you, who had read your book but who saw it in its title, might accuse you of doing something that you and others have accused various other people like Chandran and lots of people who publicized mirror neurons with a big overstatements or excessive claims. So somebody might say, well, look at the title of his book. It's The Myth of Mirror Neurons. So this guy is claiming to deny the existence of mirror neurons, and you agree that would be an excessive claim, and that isn't really your claim, right? Okay. So would you be happy with the following? I don't know if you've seen a draft of a review of your book by Rizzolatti and Sinigalia.
Yeah, that's where he said that it's ridiculous to say that these support actual understanding.
So, so another thing they say is that a major feature, or something like that, I don't remember the exact phraseology, of what we've discovered is that there is a certain type of mechanism, this mirroring type mechanism, which is sort of interpersonal in many cases, or most cases. And that in itself is a very important kind of phenomenon, that there are many different kinds of species, there are many different kinds of domains, there's the action domain, there are various emotional domains, the pain domain, so there are various different domains in which this kind of simulating or mirroring kind of relationship across individuals is found. And that in itself is a major discovery for cognitive neuroscience. And the fact that we haven't been able to identify a particular function of any of these instances of mirroring doesn't in any way encroach on or threaten that generalization. So would you agree that this is true, that there are these findings and they constitute support for the generalization as I formulated it, which is I think the same as the way Rizzolatti and Sinigalia formulated it, and that that's interesting and not trivial. So I'm just really seeking to get an understanding of what you claim. So I'm trying to see in my own mind whether I think you're leaving aside the implicatures of the title, you've gone beyond, you've gone too far. Maybe you don't, maybe you won't.
A couple people have attacked me on a title, and I'm a little surprised by that. I mean, if I said the myth of Jesus, doesn't mean I deny his existence. But the myth that he is the Son of God would be a perfectly good topic for that book. So only people who are diehard supporters of mirror neurons find a problem with the title. So I don't see the point of that.
Was it your choice or was the published?
Steve Pinker suggested the title.
Okay, I'm not surprised. But don't you think it would have been more fair to call it Myths About?
Yeah, that's what, I don't want to argue about the title of the book, really.
Well, you chose it, so.
Let's talk about this at the cocktail time. What was the, I want to answer the question. Do you remember what Rizzolatti compared the mirror mechanism to? It's a very general mechanism comparable to, and I'm blanking on it. It was something like...
It was EPSP.
Yes. EPSP.
Okay.
Excitatory postsynaptic
Okay,
potential. So a general property.
So let's think about that. Excitatory postsynaptic potentials is the basis of action understanding. Does that explain anything?
No, you're misrepresenting.
No, listen.
That there is such a phenomenon, not that it has a particular function.
Wait a second. He compares the mirror mechanism with something very general. Fair enough. General to the extent that it is something as basic as excitatory postsynaptic potentials. Fine. If that's the case, let's do the work and show that that's the case. That would be an amazing result. But then you have to ask, does that explain anything? So if we just translate that generality of mechanism to the claim, excitatory postsynaptic potentials are responsible for action understanding, it's now vacuous because it doesn't explain anything. It's a big mechanism, but all these claims that I'm arguing about are gone.
So I think you're going a little too quickly. So you can ask, there are a lot of things that you could want explained. So sometimes you might want to have explained why this individual is in a certain cognitive state or emotional state or what have you, any particular state. So if the mirror mechanism is if it's a fact that there are mirror mechanisms and they have the kind of properties we described to them, then a possible explanation of that individual having that state is because that other individual had that state, and the first one we identified perceived it or perceived some behavioral or other visible, detectable thing. So that would be explaining something.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be analogous to the explanation of of the kind that has been offered for action understanding.
Related to that
but it would
point.
explain something.
Okay. Related to that point, he criticized me for, he said that mirror neurons as a mechanism, it operates differently in different regions. Okay? And I'm attacking in general, which is not true. I looked at mirror neurons in connection with speech, with apraxia, facial expression. I went across as many domains as I could and found no evidence. I thought you were going to talk about
But you jump from macaque to humans as far as it supports your idea. When you were speaking of the specificity of the function according to the location and the species, it's just claiming a different thing. So the idea is that I show the example of the oculomotor, a neuron responding when the saccade is performed and when the monkey is gazing at another monkey looking in this very same direction. So no one would claim that this neuron enables you to understand grasping. It's a different brain circuit.
So what,
it connects LIP with the frontal eye field and not the anterior intraparietal area with a F5. The purpose of the circuit is different, both in execution and observation. That's what the point Giacomo was making.
No, I got it, and I got the point. And my response was that for every domain that this mechanism has claimed to support, I tried to look at the data. And the data in every case showed that it doesn't support it. And I still have not heard an answer. I still have not heard an answer why the mirror mechanism is so important for action understanding when you can take it out and you don't have an effect. Let me ask both of you one thing. Suppose no one in the audience has mirror neurons, and I do this. What did you not understand about that movement without your mirror neurons? Explain to me what it is that mirror neurons add. Because I can understand if a hawk comes in and flies it, grabs it, I can't mirror that movement. What is it that mirror system is?
It's a grasping hand.
But I can
It's a
understand.
moving object crossing your visual field. So looking at the hand, grasping a bottle is not like looking at an apple falling from a tree.
So you're saying that if they don't have mirror neurons and I do this, they don't understand that action at all?
If you kill out all mirror neurons, my prediction would be that their understanding is completely different.
Okay,
It has to be learned.
I anesthetize the entire left hemisphere, producing mutism acutely, and the people could still understand speech.
Okay, well, this is a very perilous line of thought. For example, I challenge the idea that you can have a contentful mind life without neocortex. If you read some recent papers of hydrocephalic poor young adults, they are left with practically no neocortex, and apparently they can entertain thought. Is that enough for you to make the claim that you don't need the neocortex to think?
I anesthetize the
I mean,
entire
you
left
are
hemisphere. and
following that line of
I
thought.
anesthetize the entire left hemisphere, completely creating a mute person, and they can still perceive speech.
You are left with the right.
They
And
can't.
language is,
Functionally, you've disrupted the system.
it's by that.
So you're claiming that there is a motor speech system in the right hemisphere that doesn't control movement, because it can't, it's still active, yet is involved in comprehension. You have to explain the fact that you disrupt it and produce a functional deficit on the motor side, and not so much a functional deficit on the. I have not seen an explanation for this result, which I've repeatedly stressed. I don't think we can move forward with this theory until we address that question and start doing some experiments that test the two viable theories that are out there already. And it's just not happening. There's an unwillingness to go in that direction.
Victorio, do you want a last word?
No, the last word, no. It's
Okay, well now things are getting a little bit punchy. Maybe it's time for us to go and have a drink. So things are getting.